And it's what? Chav Gimel Tamuz. Yesterday was Chav Beis, tomorrow is Chav Dalet. I was supposed to take off today, don't ask. I'm taking off tomorrow, so I'm here now. Rabbi Blumen will be here tomorrow. Now, we're on page 195. We're on page 195, okay? This is a Sicha from Yud Beis Tamuz from 60 years ago, from Tafshin Chof. And yesterday we learned a very famous story, The Rebbe tells the story in all of its details. The Nekudas HaSipur is, the point of the story is, that when the Friedrich Rebbe was 15, on his 15th birthday, his father took him to what his father called it an Akedah. He tied him, he bound himself to him, and he called it also a Krisus Bris, a covenant. And from the age of 15, the Friedrich Rebbe became Kvayachol, the right hand of the Rebbe Rashab in all in Yorim of Askonos. As I told you yesterday, the Friedrich Rebbe served the Jewish people. The Friedrich Rebbe was the public property of the Jewish people for 55 years. 25 years he was a public servant as a son of a Rebbe. And 30 years was a public servant as a Rebbe. At 15, the Rebbe Nishmas Hayid made him into a Rish Tziburi. Now, and of course, the point is he told them that you have to have Mesiras Nefesh. What's Mesiras Nefesh? The Rebbe Rashab to the Friedrich Rebbe, what's Mesiras Nefesh? Azoyu nicht anders. This way and no other way. Mesiras Nefesh means that when you have a mission, a task that you need to do for Klal Yisrael, it has to be precisely one way, and there's no equivocations, no compromise, there's no negotiating. Azoyu nicht anders. Yud. Well, I don't understand. Why did the Friedrich Rebbe tell us all this? In other words, by the way, the time the Friedrich Rebbe told this story, if you look at footnote 56, in Tafshin Hay, the Friedrich Rebbe told the story in 1945, 50 years after it occurred. 50 years after it occurred, the Friedrich Rebbe was mefarsim this mais. Azay kutois. And the shaila is why we need to know this. L'shema sipe kvei kedushas meir v'chamei admor kolze. Why did Friedrich Rebbe tell us this story? Eich sheichnisu oisoy, how he was included. In the work of being a public community person. Why is it important for us to know, as kol hapratim, all the details, keitzad nasa hadovad, how it happened? The Friedrich Rebbe is a Rebbe. He's a ish tziburi, he's a public person. Why do we need to know the story of how it all began? And the Rebbe continues, this itself is proof. From the fact that the story is being told to us, it's proof. In order to understand the substance of the work, that this we need to know, because that leads to a second question. How the work has to be carried out through the shliach. So there's two things. Number one, what is the task? Number two, how you have to do it. Tzrichim later, you have to first know what was the preparation to entering into this work. The Rebbe says the Friedrich Rebbe told us this story because in order for us to do the work we need to know how you enter into this work, what is the nature of this work, and how you carried it out. Shekain, because hachana le'inyan, preparing for something. Tzricha liyas behetem ela inyan, when you're doing a certain inyan. And to start it, you have a chinuch, you have an initiation, you have an inauguration, you have a beginning. There's a relationship between what you're going to do and what the beginning is. Utnai ve'efanei ha'avoda, the condition of the work, tzrichim lehishtakev, needs to reflect itself, needs to be mirrored. Bitnai ve'efanei ha'achana la'avoda, and the condition and the way the work should be done. If we know the work and we know how it needs to be done, but we don't know how it was prepared, there's a possibility to think it can be done in a different way. So the Rebbe says, the Frierdiker Rebbe told us the story because we need to know the story. We need to know the story because if the Eibishter gives you a shlichus, the Rebbe gives you a shlichus, you have to know what it is, you have to know how to do it, and you have to know how to start it. Because only when you know how it was started will you do it correctly. So this is the Rebbe's point. We need to hear the story of how the Rebbe Rashab took a 15-year-old boychik, I'm sorry for using that word, a 15-year-old boy, and he gave him away to Klal Yisrael. Mamish. The Rebbe Rashab took the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab knew who the Frierdiker Rebbe was. And he made him an Ish Tziburi, he made him a public person. He was meant to be a Rebbe, yeah, but he became a Rebbe at 40. This happened 25 years before that when he was 15 years old. And the Rebbe says, the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us the story because this story tells us how Askonis needs to be done from the time of its Achana. You know, I was doing a Zoom for somebody a while back. And when I came on, I was talking, so before I came on, they had a video of the Rebbe. And I didn't see the whole video, but I remember the Fabrengen. It was Yud Beis Tamuz Tafshin Mem Hey, which is 35 years ago. This Yud Beis Tamuz, for those who don't remember, I imagine some of you don't remember, that was when the Rebbe spoke about the Sfarim the first time. It was a Sunday night, I believe. I think it was a Sunday night. Maybe it was Monday night. It was Yud Beis Tamuz. And the Rebbe spoke about the Sfarim. And that Fabrengen, in addition to the Rebbe talking about the Sfarim, the Rebbe spoke a whole Indian in Nigle about Melech ben Melech. How Melucha is given over from generation to generation. It's a L'kutei Sichos and Chayesara of all places. About being Moshech Melech ben Melech, whatever the case is. And in the course of that Fabrengen, the Rebbe told the story in great detail. And in the 1980s, the Rebbe was not in the habit of telling stories b'chalal. Certainly not by Pirtei Pratis, but this story that Rebbe told in great detail. The Nekudas HaSipur was that there was a goy, a Russian goy, a very prominent man in the government, who was a big Rasha. And I don't even remember all the details, but the Rebbe had to get access to the office building that he was in. The Rebbe Rashab told him to go be Mevatel Gzeira. The Rebbe Rashab had to feed the Rebbe that this goy has made a Gzeira against Yidden. I don't know what the Gzeira was, but it was very, very serious. And the Rebbe Rashab, his father, sent the Frierdiker Rebbe to destroy the Gzeira. So the Frierdiker Rebbe used all kinds of connections to get access to the building. It was a sealed office building. It was a government building. He got into that building and he started wandering around. He wanted to find the office of this minister. He didn't even know which his office was. And that was very dangerous. You ask the wrong person, they can arrest you, whatever it is. He finds this guy's office. He goes into the office and there's two piles, all kinds of issues, legal issues that are being discussed and how they should be handled. If I remember correctly, he took the Gzeira that was already sealed, he tore it up, put it in the garbage, walked out of the office, walked out of the building, came back to the Lubavitch, and told the Rebbe Rashab what he did. He risked his life. He went into this place, didn't ask anybody any questions, found the office, was Mevatel Gzeira, not through negotiations, he simply destroyed the document, and then whenever this document went up the chain of commands, it simply wasn't there, it was missing. That's how Mevatel Gzeira. And I told you this yesterday, that the Chassidim told the Rebbe Rashab. The Chassidim of the Rebbe Rashab said to the Rebbe Rashab, Chassidim knew these stories, and this didn't happen once. Happened Kamapam, there's another story, and I don't think it's the same story, but it is, that the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rayatz had to meet. There was a big Tzeider Yisrael, a government leader, who was a terrible anti-Semite, a Rosha Post, a Schlechter. And he get pleasure from hurting people B'chlal and from hurting Yidden B'frat. And again, the way the stories are told, everything comes with names and places, but I don't remember them. Huh?
The first one was Stalinin.
Stalinin. Okay, Kenzai. And it could be these two stories are the same story, but one of the stories was that there was a Goy, a big Rasha, who was completely in transit. He was a stubborn, bad man. He had one weakness. He had a teacher. His teacher was a big chacham, a professor, an old professor, also a Goy, no lover of Jews, but he was a more reasonable man. If you could get to his teacher could maybe have an influence on him to be Mevatel Gzeira. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asked for a meeting with this teacher. This teacher was also an eccentric and also not a lover of Jews. So he gave the Frierdiker Rebbe a meeting on Friday night. He knew full well that there's no way for the Frierdiker Rebbe to keep that appointment and still keep Shabbos. Why? Because Jews were not allowed to be in big cities. He lived in a big city. And if you would stay in the city overnight, they would arrest you. So he put the Frierdiker Rebbe in a position that if he would want to have the meeting, it would have to be Machal Shabbos. So the Frierdiker Rebbe went to a tavern, Kipshute, a bar, before Shabbos. He parked himself in this bar, the Rebbe Rayatz. Friday night he walked on foot to this man. He met him, he talked to him, they made whatever arrangements they need to make, that later the Rebbe would be able to meet his Talmud, whom he really wanted to meet. And he spent the entire Shabbos in a tavern. Frierdiker Rebbe put on a talis, you imagine, the Frierdiker Rebbe. So I think it was after this story that the Pashat Chassidim came to the Rebbe Rashab and they said to him, you can't do this with the life of your son. And the Rebbe Rashab said, no, for a son of Siburas to have Mesiras Nefesh, if you have to have Mesiras Nefesh in public. And that's when he said the word, Muftachani as evet Meirech Yomam Zayin. I have an assurance, not Butchuni, but Miftachani. Frierdiker Rebbe says there's different ways of saying it. I have a trust, I have a certainty that he's going to be Meirech Yomam. The Frierdiker Rebbe lived 70 years, and I mentioned this already yesterday, that the Rebbe said that the last 17 years of his life was Shalei al Piteva Lagamre. So if the last 17 years of his life was Shalei al Piteva Lagamre, Kumtais, that the Frierdiker Rebbe should have lived 53 years. But the Rebbe Rashab said about his son, Muftachani as Evet Meirech Yom. So the Rebbe says any person who's involved in Askonas needs to know the meaning of the work, needs to know how to do the work, and he even needs to know how you're inaugurated, how you're initiated into doing the work from before. V'harayeh, the Frierdiker Rebbe saw it necessary to tell us the story of his chinuch, how he was initiated. So let's continue to read. Toichno shal ha'avoidehi. The nature of this work is askonus haklau, public service, binyanim gashmim ubinyanim ruchim, about physical things and about spiritual things. I already mentioned this too yesterday. That the Rebbe was medayek. That the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe that I'm making you my point man in all matters of Askonas in Gashmis and in Ruchnias, and he emphasized Gashmis before Ruchnias. Kedivrei klei kedushat modesh masayet, as we read yesterday in the Sicha. Shana kodesh alehem, the point of it all is ha'inyan da afatas hayados, the inyan of spreading Yiddishkeit, ad la afatas pnimius atayr, including spreading Hasidus. Shezehu inyan afatas hamayonis, which is spreading the fountains, the well springs of Torah to the outside. V'shetihiyeh ha'hafatza, the dissemination must be ba'oifen sheyagia ad chutza, has to reach even the most remote places. So the Rebbe says that the Rebbe Rashab gave the Frierdiker Rebbe a mission, and on the outside it has to do with Gashmias, or it has to do with basic ruchnias. But the end of it is afatas hamayonis, afatas hamayonis chutza. In other words, the Rebbe said many times that the whole idea of shlichus, to be mekan of a yid, to keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher and all these other things, is that safe kol sefer should come to spreading chassidus. Omnam, however, kasher lo yodim, and one is not sure be'ezeh oifen hoisa ha'achana ve'ha'hakdoma la'avedazu 196 now. If you didn't know how it all began, if you didn't know how the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, was appointed as a public servant, yechelim la'asek b'chol inyonim elu, you could be busy doing all of these good things. But even in such a way, shaloi yihiyeh kefi harotzui, it shouldn't be as it should be. Kilashein kvei kedush that monish maseit, as the Rebbe said, as it's supposed to be. In the Gemara, there's an expression which the Rebbe also uses from time to time. The boil le'meheve. The boil le'meheve means as much as it could be. You could do something, but you have to do it to the full extent. In order for someone to be involved in public service, in askanas, and to do it as it must be done, it's necessary to know what was the preparation for this avodah. And through this we know how the work must be carried out by knowing how the Frierdiker Rebbe was initiated. You don't only know what you need to do, you also know how you need to go about doing it. Let's explain. The Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, when you're doing Askanos Tziburis, it has to be kfiyat, it has to be in a desired way, in the correct way. So the Rebbe says, the Hainu, this means, Kifi HaRotzen, according to will. Shemekashrim zeh im inyan HaRotzen dafki. When the Rebbe Rashab said that when you're doing public service, you have to do it in a way that's rotzoi, that's desirable. So the Rebbe says, our Rebbe says, the diak of the word rotzoi has to do with will. And the Rebbe explains, Yodua HaChilik shebein rotzen l'seichel, we all know the difference between will and reason. What's the difference if a person wants something or if a person understands that he wants something? The difference between a person who wants something and a person who understands that he wants something is that if you want something because you understand it, there's a logic to your want. And if you want stam, there isn't a logic to your want. It's called the pnimius haratzen, which is above reason. So the Rebbe says the following. When I want something based on reason, even if one detail is missing, it's still reasonable. If I want $100, it's a simple example and a silly example, but it'll serve the purpose. If I want $100 and you offer me 90, I got 90% of what I want. If I wanted to work 40 hours a week for so many and so many dollars per hour and offered me less hours for less money, I got something of what I want. Says the Rebbe, when somebody wants something and it's not based on reason, one of my mashpiyim told me a marshal for rotzen, the Rebbe said $1. Yeah. What's half of $1 from the Rebbe? What? It's either $1 from the Rebbe. There's no splitting. If there's even one detail, not based on the want, it's nothing. When somebody does something and it's based on reason, half of what he reasons, or a quarter of what he reasons, or 3/4 of what he reasons is substantive, it's a piece. But if a person wills it, if it's not exactly as he willed it, it's nothing. And of course, Yiddishkeit is Ratzon, right? We all know that Chassidus teaches us that the mitzvahs are called the Ratzon Ha'elyon. They're called the crown of Torah, Keseh Shel Torah. So if a person does a mitzvah minus one detail, yeah, you make a pair of tefillin, perfectly beautiful tefillin, and you're missing one letter. The tefillin are not 99% kosher; they're 100% puzzle. Why? It's only missing one letter. Or if one letter is cut, or if two letters are touching, why is it so terrible? And the answer is that the Eibush gave us tefillin because of the reason of tefillin. Half a pair of tefillin is half of the reason of tefillin. But the Eibush gave us mitzvahs because they're His will. If the will is not met exactly, it's nothing, it's zero. Again, I talked about this yesterday also. I had this in the Maimonim and the Sichas. There's something called Hagbola Atzmis. Hagbola Atzmis means it's a limited thing. Right? Tefillin is a limited thing. A mezuzah, it's a limited thing. Yeah, even tzedakah is a limited thing. Every mitzvah is designed to be limited. But we say, it's based on Chassidus, that in that limitation there's beligavul. In that limit there's an infinity. Why? Because each mitzvah is not based on the tam, on the reason for the mitzvah. Each mitzvah is the ratzon, is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when it comes to will, there's no such thing as division. Now this is one of the ideas that you have so much in Chassidus, and ever since it's written also in Sfarim. Right? Do mitzvahs have reasons? Do mitzvahs have reasons? Huh? Do mitzvahs have reasons? I'm going to waste my time, waste your time and waste my time because I want to. Yeah? It says in the Mishnah, even the girls know this. It's a Masechta Berachos. It says in the Mishnah that one of the Tayag mitzvahs in the Torah is called Shiluach HaKan. Shiluach HaKan means that if you ski kore, they're not farmed birds, they're wild birds. Yeah, wild birds. They're out in the field, and you see a nest, and in the nest there's unfledged babies, or there are eggs. It means beitzim or yefroichim. So the halach is like tikach emal abadi, we're not allowed to take the children, the babies, when the mother is there. You have to, or both of them, and to send away the mother, and then you can take the eggs or the efreichem, the unfledged birds. And the Gemara says shalech the shalach twice. If she comes back, send her away again. If she comes back, when she doesn't come back, then you can take it. So the Mishnah says on this mitzvah, if somebody says that the reason for the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan is because the Eibush is teaching us midas harachmanas, that you have to have even rachmanas on animals, tell them to be quiet. Why? Because the mitzvahs of the Eibush that are not sichliyos, mitzvahs of the Eibush not based on reason, the mitzvahs of the Eibush that are based on gzeiris. That's the Lashon HaRambam. So the Rambam writes that you should know. You know why the Eibush gave us a mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan? You know why the Eibush gave us a mitzvah of sending away the mother bird before you take the eggs of the unfledged chicks? Because of Rachmanis. And oh, by the way, you think I don't know the Mishnah? I know the Mishnah. I know the Mishnah says you're not allowed to say, but I'm saying. So the Rambam asked the Kasha himself, I don't understand why would I say Hebech HaMishnah? So the Rambam says because the Eibush doesn't want you to think that that's the whole reason. The Rambam holds, the Rambam has a shita. Any reason you should give for a mitzvah, you should give. But you should never think that that's the real reason, or that's the whole reason. You should know it's always more. And that's the pshat in the Mishnah. Of course, Hashem is teaching us, amongst many things, midas tevis. Sending away a mother bird before you take her children against her will, obviously just want children to be taken away, is an infant achzariyas. So the Eibush should send away the mother to the Rachmanis. The Mishnah says you shouldn't say that. Says the Rambam, the Mishnah is saying you shouldn't say that that's the whole reason for the mitzvah. But it's part of the reason for the mitzvah. And the same is true with all mitzvah. By the way, you should know, Shiluach HaKan is a funny mitzvah, yeah? You know how much Kabbalah there is in this mitzvah? There's huge discussions in Zohar and in Kabbalah. This mitzvah is discussed as such. There's so many deep explanations for Shiluach HaKan. Kabbalah is brought also in Hasidus, yeah? So the Rambam is saying we know that mitzvahs have reasons. But the true reason for a mitzvah is, this is what the Eibishter wants. In other words, the true reason for mitzvahs is that it's higher than time. And because mitzvah higher than time, if you do it correctly, it's what the Eibishter wanted. If you do it 1% off, it's not off by 1%. It's efes, it's gunish. Let's read it. Yeah, I'll read that line again. If there's even one detail, which is not consistent with the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then it's not at all. The will of Hashem has not been kept at all. And the Rebbe continues. Baharatz and Guf and the Eibishter's will itself, Yachaliyis, there could be Gami and Shalhidur, Vadla Mahadin, Mina Mahadin. You could do the will of Hashem beautifully, and beautiful within beautiful. Avo, but beauty is only in the Eichus, you know. It's not I'm going to do more parts. When you do a mitzvah, you have to do the mitzvah in all of its details. Here the mitzvah is not to add another detail to the mitzvah. Here the mitzvah means that I'm doing all the details of the mitzvah and I'm doing them in a more beautiful way. Only when you do the mitzvah as the Eibishter prescribed it, as the Eibishter designed it, is it a mitzvah? Is it his ratzon? And then you can start talking about doing it more beautifully. However, if there's a detail in the mitzvah that is missing, the will of Hashem was not fulfilled at all. So when the Rebbe Rashab says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I'm bringing you, I'm making an Akedah, I'm binding you to me and me to you. And along with the Akedah, there's a Krisis Bris, there's a covenant. That you're going to be my right hand. The Rebbe Rashab told the Frierdiker Rebbe, you're going to be my right hand in all matters of Askanos Buddhist. And I talked about this recently a lot. The Frierdiker Rebbe was 15, and he dealt with the biggest Gedolim in Russia. And Russia had Groise Gedolim. Yidden who were older than his father. But matters of Askanos, the Rebbe says, I knew my father's handwriting. The Rebbe Rayat said, Tatan's Ksav. I learned my father's handwriting, and I used to write the letter in my father's handwriting, and my father would sign his name, and you couldn't tell that it was two different handwriting. I want to tell you a Maise Derech Agav, just the Geshmak of Maise. It's a moidendik of Maise. It's an unbelievable story. The Rebbe Rashab had a house. The house had rooms. A number of rooms in this house were Chadrei HaSfarim. And the Rebbe Rashab's library was 40, 50,000 Sfarim. It was massive. So many Sfarim takes up a lot of space, so there were a number of rooms where the Sfarim were housed. And amongst the Sfarim was the Ksavim. You had manuscripts from the Alter Rebbe, from the Mittler Rebbe, from Tzemach Tzedek, from the Rebbe Marash. And of course then you had the Rebbe Rashab's own Ksavim. The Frierdiker Rebbe went into this cheder where the Ksavim were held. And he was reading, everything was handwritten, and it was also old, it was hard to read. A Maimer from the Rebbe Marash, from the Rebbe Rashab's father. And one of the Maimorim of the Rebbe Marash was unfinished. The Rebbe Marash didn't complete the Maimer. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, just for fun, it's the Rebbe's fun, sat down, and he wrote the end of the Maimer on a piece of paper. The Rebbe Marash started a Maimer, he didn't finish it, so the Frierdiker Rebbe decided to complete the Maimer, but he wrote it in the handwriting of his grandfather. He wrote it in the handwriting of the Rebbe Marash. He was able to imitate the handwriting exact. In other words, he knew more than he was able to imitate his father's handwriting and his grandfather's handwriting, and of course then he had his own handwriting. And of course he was thinking that when he finishes, he'll take the paper with him. And he forgot. 2 days later, the Rebbe Rashab calls him in. His face is radiant. By me, it is heint a greise simcha. He tells the Frierdiker Rebbe. By me, today is an unbelievable simcha. Ich habe gefunden an neuen Ksaf von Taten, was ich von dem nicht gewusst. Do you imagine? The Rebbe said, I found a Maimer from my father that I didn't know about, and I'm mamish. And the Frierdiker Rebbe is thinking, I just fooled my father. You know, if I fool my father, you fool your father, it's also not nice. But if your father is the Rebbe, and he fooled him in a matter of Torah, the Rebbe Rashab didn't see that it was not, if I tried to mime it, if I knew the handwriting of the Rebbe Marash, and I knew him, the Rebbe Rashab would know that I wasn't for the Rebbe Marash. So the Frierdiker Rebbe describes walking around for 3 days in ganz tumult. He was ois mensch. He deceived his father. After 3 days, he went into Yechidus, and he cried, Demois Shlish, he apologized. He didn't know where to put himself. Anyway, the Rebbe Rashab was amused. When he told the Rebbe Rashab that it's not a new Ksav, I went in and I saw an unfinished Maimer, so I finished it. I was supposed to take it with me. So the Frierdiker Rebbe felt so bad that he had tricked his father, and the Rebbe Rashab said, I forgot the wording exactly, Nish Punkt gefährliche Sache. There's bigger Rabbeinus. But he fooled us because he knew how to do their handwritings. The Rayat used to write letters for his father. He was Mamish's right hand. I told you on the story the other day that there was once a big meeting of the biggest Rabbanim in Russia. The biggest. The Chofetz Chaim, Rab Chaim Brisker, and all the Gedalim. The Rebbe Rashab couldn't go to the meeting with Nesiba. So he sent the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe was 17. A boy. Mamish, a boy. And it didn't look right. The biggest Rabbanim in Russia getting together, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe sends a teenager. So he sent along a white beard. The Rebbe told the story by Fabrengen. Our Rebbe told the story by Fabrengen. Who was the white beard? The white beard was the Rashbatz. The Rashbatz was a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek. So chassid from Tzemach Tzedek, chassid from the Rebbe Marash. Now a chassid from the Rebbe Rashab, he was an old man. And the Rebbe Rashab sent along the Rashbatz that there should be a Weisse board. Right before they left Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab suddenly calls in the Rashbatz by himself. And he comes into the Rebbe Nishmas Yedin, and the Rebbe Rashab tells him, Du sollst wissen, als ich schicke, was weniger du wirst sich mischen als besser. I want you to know that I'm not sending, you're not my representative. My 17-year-old boy is my representative. And if you'll keep quiet, it'll be better. And the quieter you'll be, in other words, I'm sending you that it should look respectable. But understand, you're just the look. Vem shikich a 17-year-old. Verstehst Fana Weisse, weißt Fana Weisse, that the Rebbe Rashab once came back to Lubavitch. The Frierdiker also was a teenager. This is in the Sichas from the week of Shiva, from Tafshin Yud. And he told his Rebbe in Shtana Sora that he bought the Frierdiker Rebbe a stick with a silver handle. And these sticks with the silver handles are in the Rebbe's library. They've displayed them. A stecken of wood, a stick with a silver hand. It was one of the things that the Rebbe had. Tzaddikim had. And he told the Rebbe, the last money in my pocket I paid to buy this stick. So the Rebbe said to the Rebbe Rashab, how important is the stick? I mean, the Frierdiker Rebbe was not exactly limping at 17. He didn't need the stick to walk. It was an honor stecken. It was a stick of honor, not a stick of a person who's a chman son and a cripple or a limp. He bought it for kavod. So the Rebbe says, so you have to spend your last money on this stick. So the Rebbe Rashab said to the Rebbe Shtene Sara, ich hab sich erst itzte der wusst wer it is. The Rebbe said, I just realized who my son is. Imagine the Rebbe Rashab should say, I finally figured out what kind of son I have. It was this, and the Rebbe he was 15, 16, so he was a very young man. And the Rebbe Rashab said, I didn't know myself who my son was until now, so I had to buy him this stick. Anyway, getting back to the point. The point is that the Frierdiker Rebbe from a very young age was put into the Anyin von Askanas, and the Rebbe Rashab says, Kfi Haratzen. Kfi Haratzen means that everything you're involved with is Torah. And if everything you're involved with is Torah, it conforms to one rule. Half is not half, it's 0. 99% is not 99%, it's 0. Because it's Kfi Haratzen. It's Lamayla Min HaSeichel. And the Rebbe continues, L'chaera, arguably, when a person is doing public service, there's a reason to it, there's a logic to it. Al pi seichel, havana v'asag, it's reasonable, it's based on understanding, and so forth. The Frierdiker Rebbe said many times, and he re-emphasized over and over again, the spreading of Torah, and the spreading of mitzvahs, and the spreading of chasidus. It has to be orderly, organized, in other words, reasonable. To consider the sensitivities, the sensibilities, and the talents, and the character traits, the person with whom one is speaking. You have to influence them in such a way, it has to be reasonable. Im Kain therefore says the Rebbe Managay Inyan Eretz. I don't understand. The Rebbe himself said that when you're doing shlichus, you have to use your head. So what is Negay Eretz? Ach Inyan who the teretz is? She'emos ha'yochel ha'seichel havana v'asagel livos ha'avoida. When can reason support the work? Kachet ha'yesod lazeh. If the beginning is Ratzon, right? Like you had the story with the Meraglim, right? What was the problem with the Meraglim? The Meraglim came back and they said exactly what they were told. The Meraglim were asked to report on the Matzav in Eretz Yisrael, and they came back and they reported on the Matzav in Eretz Yisrael. What was the problem with the Meraglim? The Meraglim said an opinion. Nobody asked them for an opinion. They were told to report what they saw, but not to say whether you can conquer it. That decision had already been reached. The Rebbe says a shliach has to use his brain, but he has to know what the shlichus is. You know, the Rebbe used to say that when a fire is burning, you can use clean water and dirty water as long as it puts out the fire. Just make sure it isn't kerosene. The Rebbe says the yesod has to be ratzon. Okay, we're going to